got some questions for the other guests here today. We're excited to be joined by Rowan Tabu from the Sharing Perspectives Foundation and by Waidehi, who's the executive director of Solia, who many people I can tell as participants in this call know both of them through either of their roles. We're really excited to have you join us today. Do either of you want to say more about who you are and what you do?
Rowan, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so thank you, Adi. My name is Rowan Tahub, as Julie told you. I'm currently in Palestine. I work with Sharing Perspectives Foundation on virtual exchanges. So I do facilitation as well as program creation or development. I've also got my students at Hebron University to take part in those projects. So I played a bit of different roles in virtual exchange, and would love to be sharing this all with you today.
As Julie said, I represent Solia. We are a not-for-profit based out of New York and Tunis, and we've been doing virtual exchange work for coming up to 19 years. And so building that trust in that online space is really sort of the core of being able to have impact in that space. And so I'm very excited to join this conversation.
Thank you. Waidehi, you were building trust online before it was cool, before it was needed, before there was Zoom.
It's true.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what comes out of this. So a few participation guidelines for those who are tuning in to this webinar. We will be taking questions. So we're going to spend some time talking, and then we'll have time for questions to each other and questions from you as well. So if you have them throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also, chat with each other as well in the chat, but if you want to make sure your question is definitely asked, use the Q&A function there. Okay, so I was spending some time doing a brief intro into why I think this is a relevant topic now, building trust online. And then I thought, it's better if I just ask you folks. So first question, Rowan, and then Waidehi, why do you think that this is a relevant topic to be talking about now?
So virtual exchange has been important for 2 decades at least so far. And building trust have been there, as also what he said, she's been doing it for 19 years. So building trust and having communication. But with the global pandemic now, not only organizations, but also educators are moving or shifting online. And the issue of trusting and mistrusting people online became also more discussable, and people are trying to see how can we get participants or students to get all of the benefit out of what they're doing and while joining sessions and classes online. That's one of the aspects why it is more relevant to discuss it right now.
I would agree. I think the geopolitical kind of situation at the moment definitely pushes us into this space of eroded trust and trying to understand where that erosion is taking place. And I think one of the factors that plays into this is the dissemination of information, right? I mean, what has happened through the online medium is how quickly information can be authored, disseminated, and consumed. And if we're not able to generate any kind of efficacy around trust in that arena, then erosion is super easy to sow, to accelerate. And so if we can figure out how to ensure that in all these online spaces, we're trying to figure out how to build rather than erode that trust, then we're going to be able to counter sort of those forces, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's been our experience at Build Up as well, in kind of 2 key domains. One in which Elena was going to talk about, which was doing this recent collaboration with the mediation support unit from the UN and working with the mediation support teams there. And that being one arena where they're seeing trust, the erosion of trust being so key and relevant, because mediation processes fundamentally are looking differently now, because those who are involved in them, those who the people are involved in them are representing, have these different levels and fault lines of trust that are being broken because of the information ecosystem that Waidehi just alluded to, of this cacophony of sources and information and misinformation and disinformation that makes that process really difficult. And then on the other hand, coming in from my role of doing, of trying to build online trust on social media, is just another, it's a beast in and of itself because of that cacophony and the medium not supporting trust, or not being, the design of the social media platforms and the online mediums in which people are discussing are built to drive conflict, not built to enable trust. And so Waidehi, where you just said, you're trying to stop this erosion or build despite the erosion, we felt like that's kind of an uphill battle that the kind of odds are stacked against. Is that something that both of you feel as well?
I think so, specifically in terms of what you spoke to just now, which is that these spaces were not designed to build trust. And so if you're trying to counteract the very design of that space, that's very hard. And so I think, from where we sit, we see it as the thing that we can contribute to as an organization is imbuing the skills in the users of these spaces to have the ability to be responsible consumers and users of these spaces from that perspective. And so, you're not kind of countering the force of the social media engine, you're creating consumers and users who approach from a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I like that.
Also an uphill battle, by the way, because you have to do it a person at a time, but still.
Yeah, right. But over 17 years of doing it, there creates some groundswell. Yeah. Rowan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I agree about what you both were saying. And I also think what we're doing is one of the areas that we're working on is also creating safe spaces for people to build trust on. If we can't do it on social media, we're also offering different platforms. And like Sharing Perspectives Foundations works with Solia. So at the end, together, we're working on creating these safe spaces for people to come to trust each other, to build good relationships, and to start also countering the conflict and finding conflict resolution in terms of mistrusting of information and online.
So we kind of started talking about this question already, but maybe we just nail it down and be explicit about it. So who is or should be asking the question, how to build trust online right now? We talked a little bit about virtual exchange, online dialogue, social media, and mediators. Is that exhaustive, or who else should be asking that question?
I mean, I think each human being should be asking that question, to be honest, because we're all spending that time online. And we've had this, so for us at Solia, we've always lived online, right? We've worked as virtual teams, we've done this work. And so the pandemic year was odd for us because in some ways it was just keep calm and be Solia. But on the other hand, it did matter because actually, while we all worked online, everything pivoted online, right? You were doing all parts of life online all of a sudden. And I think that suddenly it became really apparent that doing anything in this, using this modality is actually a skill. It takes certain, it has to be designed a certain way. You have to use the platforms in a certain way. You have to have a really deep understanding of the technology in order for it to go well. And so I think because that online piece has sort of touched all of us now across, levels of power, responsibility, job space, personal, professional, everything. So I really feel like that's a question we should all be asking.
Wow. I agree.
I couldn't agree more with that. So like thinking it from a perspective of education, I think about facilitators, mediators, and educators, like thinking about how to create safe spaces for their participants to take part in that specific online space. But thinking of it on a larger scale, I would agree with what Wadihi was saying, like each and every one of us should think about how to build a trustful communication or online.
That's really interesting. I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's where Pfizer is, which is one of the vaccine suppliers. So a lot of people work here at Pfizer. It was interesting. I was talking with a friend who works there about, we didn't know that we were talking about building trust online. We were comparing kind of what our jobs do, and they're talking about the vaccine rollout and the information around that. And it just struck me so interesting that they were also trying to build trust online, towards these vaccinations, and it's the same in political campaigns. And Roman, you said education, and we have this now like common platform for interaction that we're in every domain trying to figure out, and it touches our domains maybe really deeply, because if we're working towards peace building or towards changing people's attitudes towards each other, that trust is more essential that way.
I also think there's macro and micro pieces to this. As much as we're seeing sort of an erosion of trust at the interpersonal level, at the community level, we're also, and maybe this is ubiquitous and is always around to some measure, but I think we're seeing a heightened erosion of trust in institutions in general, right? And I think that erosion is the one that's sort of most startling, and the one that I think we bear a responsibility to really pay attention to and think about as a peace building community. How do we help to tackle that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're working right now on a book chapter, kind of mapping out these different modes or archetypes of polarization. And we found, and what we're seeing in our work online on social media at least, is that kind of this final archetype is the erosion of institutions and community norms. And so the norms now, or the norms that once sort of guided our social behavior and interaction, are very different now. And now, I don't know how you guys feel or experience this, but it seems like if you ask an active listening question, or if you ask a question with empathy or curiosity, that's against the norm. It's like standing backwards in an elevator. People are like, what are you doing? That's not how we talk here. And so that's a really difficult thing to go against, is that the sort of the river is flowing really swiftly the other way towards the distrust, and that's reified in our norms and in our distrust of institutions. It's difficult. So another question here, because we kind of talked about who is or should be asking the question, and we've started in this already, but why is trust complicated online?
Rowan, please, I feel like I jump in every time she asks a question, so please just talk over me as you need to. I actually think it's really important, first of all, to say building trust is a process, whether you're doing it online or in person, and it's not easy to do. And I think that we've gotten into the mindset that because we had to pivot to online, that in some ways online is specifically more difficult. And I think that there's nuance there, and I think it starts with, again, going back to the design process. If what you're doing was designed to be in person and it got pivoted to online, that presents really specific challenges, because there were things you intended to do to build trust in person that, you can't just pivot like that, right? But I do think that trust building online is possible if the process itself is designed with that modality in mind. And I think so that pivot piece is, I think, where people found it the hardest. You're taking something that was designed to be done this way, and you're trying to do it this way.
Right.
And I think that's been a hurdle.
Yeah. That's something we've seen a lot of this year with people doing the adaptation, is just mirroring. And we know that that doesn't work. You know, if you're going to do a full day session, you can't just mirror that to be online and have it work the same way. Rowan, what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, it's a little bit more about the conspiracy theory and people being suspicious all the time from any move online. Like they're suspicious in the real life. So like, and then moving everything online and not knowing people, not seeing like the interactions, not feeling, or like like the element of touch is also really important for building trust. And losing all of these elements suddenly, so it's not like you're doing partially things online and partially you're still living your daily life, but everything shifted online. Even shopping became online. So it was like minimal, and like suddenly everybody's shopping online, everybody's doing everything online. So thinking about all of it, how should I trust everybody online? There are a lot of scandals that we're seeing in the news, either in the institutions like we're discussing before, either from people from different organizations. So building trust with people that you do not know is far more difficult, even from just building trust of shifting some of your work online. Still, you still can't read like the body language of people. So we know each other online. I can still like, it's still difficult to read the facial expressions sometimes from people that you know when you work together. So what about meeting people for the first time online and just trying to build trust with them over time? And as he said, it is a process. So it takes time. It takes a lot of activities, a lot of I wouldn't say programs, but like, yeah, a pedagogy that is built to build trust between people.
Yeah.
I also think it depends on what you're trying to do. Like, what is it you're trying to do? You know, what is the program? What is the moment? What is if, you know, and how you build that trust is very tied to what end. So, for example, if you're trying to build trust that allows a group to engage in difficult conversations, then, you know, you're going to be very deliberate about that. And you know, the first thing you're going to do is create a compact with the people who are engaging in the process. I think there's a way in which being online forces you to be over communicative about intentions and over communicative about frameworks and ground rule. I'm going to use the term ground rules. I prefer the term agreements, but that kind of notion of we're committing to this process. And so as part of that, we're committing to leaning into that notion of building that trust, you know, and then, and that's easy. Okay, so fine, you can commit to that, but then the trust building happens again, almost kind of in parallel to the discussion, right? You start the discussion and it's designed with the idea that the deeper this gets, the deeper that trust gets. And for us, I think what's always been remarkable is how quickly people do that. If you know that you've got 2 hours for X number of weeks, it's amazing how quickly that builds. And then what we often find is participants who look back and say, I never thought it would happen, you know, and I sort of got halfway through it and suddenly realized I actually entirely respect and trust these people. And I trust that we can have these conversations in a safe way. So it's always interesting to think about that reflection piece as well.
Yeah.
It also depends on the person, him or herself, because some people can open up easily and others take a lot of time to open up. And maybe after several weeks, they're still taking a step backward and not wanting to share anything about themselves. So it depends again on the person.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Waidehi, because we're kind of generalizing now because we're talking across different sort of domains and projects, but that a process is going to obviously look different. A mediation process will look different than a social media intervention process, will look different than an online dialogue or virtual exchange education process. And it's about tailoring the use of your online platforms to meet those goals. And what you said about sort of structuring or creating ground rules and agreements, that's something that rings true a lot for us as well, that you do have to over communicate. Anything that's implicit in an online setting, or in an offline setting, has to be explicit online. It takes longer to explain, longer to set up, to visualize, etc. And then you also touched on something we also find to be true on kind of social media and the mediation space as well, is that self-disclosure happens earlier online, which is like a key vehicle for relationship and trust building. And it's this interesting dynamic. It kind of speaks to not only what are the challenges of building trust online, but what are the possibilities of building trust online. And that's one of them that we see as well, that you named, that people are kind of surprised that, wow, how did we get so far? And it's interesting that the screen plays kind of this like, the screen plays this role of being able to contribute to a safe space, and that it feels like some sort of barrier that one can pull up and down based on how much comfort they're feeling or trust in the space.
I agree. I think it impacts the level of bravery that takes place. And it's, I mean, you could argue there's lots of reasons where, because you're meeting on an online space, you feel like you can wade in harder because you don't have to see that person tomorrow, whereas when you're in person, you might bump into them. And so I think there's definitely a little of that, but to a degree, I think that the fact that the screen creates that bravery is you can use that in your process quite intentionally. So yeah, I think the other thing about, this sounds very elementary, but I do think it shouldn't be overlooked. One of the things that social media spaces are not designed for is moderation. One of the reasons that design accelerates to conflict is because there isn't space for moderation. And I do think that in any other moment, when you're trying to create a trustful space online, the role of a moderator is imperative.
And facilitators are something that you both use in your programs. If you want to say more about that, Rowan.
Yes, so we have trained facilitators to facilitate these sessions and the discussion. So because we're aiming for a fruitful dialogue between participants in each and every session, those facilitators assure a safe space, a fair participation from all participants, and also are responsible to help participants to initiate their dialogues. So they use a lot of activities, and I think that answers one of the questions in the Q&A as well. So a facilitator uses a lot of activities to build relationships, to foster clarity between participants. They use different tools, like, for example, the activities, but also they're encouraging active listening. They're mirroring the ideas of participants. They're summarizing and making sure that everybody's heard and understood in the discussions. And that idea of facilitators helping participants and assuring that conflict does not arise, or if conflict arises, they are there to help participants together to come over this conflict, is a way of opening different spaces and safe spaces and trustful relationships between the group, at least inside the discussions or the sessions.
Yeah, that's something that you both of your programs have been able to do, is to sort of move people to the online set, to the container of your design. Whether it's a specific platform like Solia has, but also the model and the facilitator and the structure of how many weeks and how many hours per week. And you've been really able to shape that container in a way that I think contributes to, like, facilitating that trust building so much faster. I'm interested how that can translate to projects like our social media intervention one, where we're working on somebody else's space and not able to design that. And like you said, Vaidehi, it's not built for moderation or facilitation. And I mean, as a peace builder, that, like, you would never just go to a complex setting and throw everybody in a room together with no moderation or facilitation support. But that's what we do on social media every day. So I wonder if you have any thoughts or ideas around how to work on existing platforms when it's not possible to create your own container.
I think you all have actually been doing a little of that, no?
We've been trying.
Yeah, with the, is it the Commons project?
Yeah, exactly. So
that's, I mean, it's, other than going back to my, my rooted belief that we have to do this one human being at a time. I do, when you are thinking about those platforms, I think what you guys have been working on is important. Some years ago when some of the dust started getting kicked up around Facebook in terms of sort of the fomenting of divisive rhetoric through that platform, we had some conversations tangentially with folks involved in that space to say, we really think if you can train the people who you are using as moderators for your content in facilitation, in content development, in doing exactly what we do with these folks who come in and training people to build that online trust, to understand the authorship and digestion of content and all that kind of thing. Let's create human beings who can help to do this. But of course, it's all about a numbers game, right? And it's a lot easier to look at AI and say, bots can do it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's harder, So, but I don't have a good answer to how do we do this at true scale at the rate at which it's naturally occurring. Do you know what I mean? How do you counter all of it because it's happening at such mass? I don't know.
It's interesting you mentioned scale, because I find that's another reason trust is complicated online, because people will automatically bring that expectation of scale into it. Once you say you're doing an online program, it's like, all right, great, you can reach, scale so much faster than offline. And both of your programs do reach a scale that for the domain is, it almost seems unheard of for getting that many people in a sustained dialogue program or sustained education initiative at the same time. So what are your thoughts around scale and how that impacts your work, or is it a goal that you have?
Well, talking about scale is not easy because the more that you work, you're still working in a dot, like we say in Arabic, a dot in a sea, where it's like so minimal with the global population. But what we do is we empower people. So those people that start with us, they take the experience. So like if we look at their testimonials after they do the programs, or sometimes some of them send us like emails saying, well, I did this and this and this. So we're activating them in their communities. And this activation helps to speed up the idea of trusting people, and also the word of mouth of these activities that we do brings different people into it. So you're creating some interest in dialogue, in mediation, in reconciliation, in terms of conflict, but you cannot actually measure the impact because you don't know who are like the direct, your direct beneficiaries, but your indirect beneficiaries are uncontrollable. But you can expect that you're at least spreading the word in different communities that are taking part in those programs.
Yeah, I would absolutely concur with that. Also, scale's a funny word, right? At Celia, we for a long time our reach was about 700 to 800 young people a year, and that it was a lot of work to get that many people into the program and get them out the other side and what have you. So that was up to about 6 years ago, and then we decided, okay, because we're a not-for-profit and donors want to see sort of a ramp, you know, they want to see where are you going next. And so we decided, okay, we have to test this theory that we've always put out there, which is the modality of technology should allow us to reach far more people. And so what are the bottlenecks? What do we solve for, et cetera, et cetera? And I think this past year, we came closer to reaching about 10,000 people across various different programs. So, and we find that to be remarkable and think, wow, look what we did in just a handful of years. And then you'll say that number to some other people and they'll say, okay, but when you're reaching 1 million, you know, and so then, which is a bit disheartening, but also I do then very much back up what Rowan just said, which is what we do see is empowerment and efficacy. It's sort of like that twofold sense of not only do I feel like I understand that I ought to do something, but I actually feel like I can and know how to do something in these moments of, you know, seeing a difficult conversation happen or seeing misinformation being spread or whatever it is. And then when you hear exactly what Rowan said back from alumni saying, I had a conversation here, I, you know, created this campaign, whatever it is. So you have to trust that you know, the tentacles are spreading further than just the immediate people in your programming.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's, you know, harkens back to what you had said earlier as well about it being a person at a time. It's just a tension of it's a person at a time. Trust requires a process. Processes are hard to scale because they're, you know, it's a process, a lot of work. But achieving that level is 10,000 in a year is, I mean, it's unheard of. I've done sustained dialogue programs with 10 people a year, and that's a program, you know, offline, I mean. And so it's about both harnessing the possibilities of technology, but also like staying firm in a foundation that it still takes time. It doesn't bring with it the immediacy that we think online does. It's interesting. All right.
But
so
you don't want to compromise on the impact. You don't want to compromise on the quality, right? So that's always the push and pull of how do you grow?
Right. Yeah, you could probably reach 1 million if you were just having, you know, a 1 hour session or something and not a sustained program. Yeah. All right. So we've kind of started talking about this, but we've talked about like why is trust complicated online? And we've started bridging into this question, but I want to go deeper into it of what is possible for trust building online. And really specifically, I'm wondering if you can share what examples come to mind of successful trust building online from your own work and experiences.
Rowan, I'm going to let you go.
So how can I have plenty of experiences with my students and my participants as well when I'm facilitating. It's not easy, but it's not hard as well to start building trust, as we said before. So once you create that safe space that they can discuss together, they can express their feelings. There are a lot of participants who start sharing about their personal lives, their own experiences. I would say about 2 years ago in one of the technology and society programs that we were having for participants from the MENA region, one participant just stepped up and said well, I had a really bad experience with technology, and especially she was blackmailed on her Facebook account. So she had to turn off everything that is related to technology, and she was forced to take that part in that specific program, because it was offered by her university as part of her programs. But then she was super happy that she met a lot of people. She also expressed her feeling that, okay, I had a really bad experience with technology, but now I'm meeting with different people and I don't have to worry about sharing my experience itself, like the bad experience, but also learning from others and different experiences. So even if you have a bad experience, you can still build trust. Yeah, I know it's minimal because they met for 6 weeks, and then afterwards you need to continue building trust afterwards. But that is one of the stories. Other participants start sharing their experiences. in traveling, for example, and what happened with them. And asking advices sometimes from different participants is something that we quite often see, which is like something strange for somebody to say, like asking a stranger for advice, but then they're starting to warm up to each other, trusting in the judgment of each other. That doesn't happen every time, but those are experiences that we witness in some of our programming. Also, being able to share and express your opinion and not being afraid of sharing it in front of others is something highly important. Because we work with MENA region and Europe and Sharing Perspectives Foundation, it's always interesting to listen, like to hear from experiences, for example, from Syrian participants, when they say about what they're suffering, and it's like an opportunity for them to connect with the outer world of Syria and to discuss different topics. It doesn't have to be political. They can talk about the climate, they can talk about technology, but it's also giving them an opportunity to meet different people, to trust different people, and share their own experiences in their country and what could be done further.
Yeah, I think you create a powerful opportunity for people to hold and share their stories. And I think that, in contrast with their stories being told by media or their communities or politicians or whoever it is, I think that is, we consistently find that to be something that is powerful. And so there's lots of stories, right, over the years of young people who had, first of all, would never otherwise have the opportunity to meet people from these different disparate places, but also make assumptions, get those broken down, learn about, where their own stereotypes and biases come from, what their own triggers are, and how they play out in these spaces for building trust and engagement. So many, many stories like that. One recent story that speaks kind of to the importance, again, of designing these processes well, happened as part of our fairly new domestic program, where we gear to bring together all the incoming students on a campus. We put them into small groups across expected dividing lines, and they meet before they become, a part of the campus community. And the idea is everybody will still hit campus and people will still form tribes, which are important and powerful. But what if there's just a little bit of permeability between the walls, of those tribes? And we launched the program on a campus in a fairly conservative part of upstate New York. And, we all know we're living in a fairly politically charged moment. And one of the professors on campus later in the first semester had a moment where he wanted to open up a discussion in his class about the events that took place in the US Capitol on the 6th of January. And he said that I have two sections of my class. In the first section, we started the conversation, and of course everybody's online because it's, the Zoom moment of higher education here. And he said, cameras shut down, mics turned off.
Wow.
Nobody wanted to engage in the discussion because it was assumed to be a very charged discussion. And he said, so in my next class, I put it to them. I told them the story. I said, this is what happened when I tried to have that conversation just now. How do you propose we could do this differently? And one of the students said, why don't we do it the way we did it in 1YC, which is the domestic orientation program. Yeah. And so, the professor's reflection was, the students themselves told me how to design the classroom so that I could have them dive into this conversation. And he said, and we had a very powerful conversation as a result of that. So, I do think that for me was a very heartening story because it spoke to why it's so important to be intentional about what your intended outcome is, right? Why are you doing this, and design according to that.
Yeah. I love that. I love that story because it's just that so often we just need the on-ramp, and what that positive experience for people provided that on-ramp to be able to even engage in the discussions that are necessary and would provide the opportunities to build trust, because you have to be willing to even show up, I guess. That's awesome. All right, we have a lot of questions from people, and some people even sent in questions beforehand. So I wonder if we take some time to dive into those for our last 15 or so minutes. So these are questions this is a question that came in online beforehand, but is a common one, which is, how does platform security influence the question of building trust online? So how can we trust the platforms themselves, or how can we build trust in them, or how do we work with sort of the security of platforms we're using? I know that's a lot together, but.
No, I think it's huge. And I think that, you know, anybody who's organizing any kind of online trust building process does have to make a commitment to doing the research on what the platform is and using the right platform for the process, which is easier said than done, actually, because what we've done, what the whole world did this past year, more or less, is use Zoom for everything. Right. And so I'm hoping that what will happen in the world of technology is you'll get different verticals, you know, platforms built for specific intentions. But I think that the mistrust of the platform is going to set you back from the outset. And so introducing people fully to the platform, understanding what people's priorities are. So for example, our experience is people need to be seen and heard if you're building any kind of trust or you're engaging in any kind of difficult dialogue. So you have to choose a platform that's going to allow all participants to have that available to them. The other one is data. It's huge. So protection of data, what are your safety protocols? What does the platform guarantee? What do you as an organizer need to ensure is guaranteed? And then the other piece of it, and this is a little bit harder, I think, is familiarity, because one of the things that happens is people, if the vehicle is distracting, or you know, you're not used to it, or you don't feel comfortable in it, then whatever you're trying to do in that space becomes harder as well. So figuring out how to orient people, or choosing a platform that people are already on, so that you know that they're oriented to it already. You know, these are all the choice points, I think. But I do think putting some serious thought into that at the outset is important.
Those are really good points. Rowan, do you have additions?
No, actually, I just agree with everything that Radhika said.
Yeah. I have one addition, Waidehi, which is also to manage participant expectations of what the security of the platform is. Because sometimes, I mean, it goes two ways. Sometimes people think, oh, it's online, I can put anything, I'm safe. And you have to say, no, actually, this could be monitored in XYZ ways. You know, we're setting ground rules about not taking screenshots, not taking videos, like, et cetera, and just manage for people what is and what isn't secure for them. And then they can make their own choice. I know this came up often in the Sharing Perspectives Foundation when working with refugees and participants from Syria, is that people were afraid that the government was monitoring their use of the online. Sure. Yeah, exactly. And to a point we had to say, maybe we've done all of these things to ensure platform security. This is what we cannot monitor or make sure isn't happening. And so then it's your choice, you know, to determine what is and what isn't safe for you. So I think that managing risks and managing expectations is another piece.
And recognizing that people will be on different, they'll be on a bit of a spectrum, right? Some people will feel very comfortable with the idea of, sure, take a screenshot and post it. And other people will be deeply uncomfortable with that. So again, it's like that over communication of expectations and agreements around the technology as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and technology itself sometimes also not, okay, how could I say? So some participants are not happy with having their videos on while we're doing our programming. We're making sure that all of them have the opportunity to be seen and heard. Some participants still have the element of mistrusting their videos to be shown. One of them is not to be recorded, not to be taken a screenshot of. It could be also cultural elements, but all of those together should be like encountered in like orientation, or also building trust during the sessions or during the program itself.
Yeah, Rawan, I want to have like a follow-up webinar 2.0 with you because I found that really fascinating that so for background, Rawan managed like the first Arabic only speaking virtual exchange that I know of. And you saw interesting cultural differences with that program versus the English speaking programs. Is that right, Rawan, in terms of like what mistrust looked like?
Exactly. There are different elements of mistrust, like in that particular program, because participants were unwilling to turn on their cameras. They're always giving like different excuses, or maybe also the culture itself. So participants were comfortable with with smoking a cigarette in front of the screen, while others were not comfortable in turning on their cameras. So those differences that we've never seen, for example, in an English course, even if the same participants are taking part in the English courses.
Yeah.
So the expectations also plays a major role here. What is expected from, not their expectation, but what is expected from them, and how they're dealing with different cultures.
Yeah. All right, so I think that's a good, at least a primer introduction on security and trust in tech. So I want to take one of the questions here that's in the Q&A. And this is from Ta, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. It says, I'm also curious about your thought on how multilingual spaces affect the dynamics of building trust online.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big variable in building trust, right? And so when Solia first began back in 2002, 2003, the participants in the programming were coming only from the United States and the MENA region. And even within the MENA region, it was sort of quite narrow as to where they were coming from. And so the commitment that the organization had made at the outset was that we would have one English speaking and one Arabic speaking facilitator in every dialogue process, to ensure that, you know, you're offsetting power dynamics, you're ensuring linguistic kind of balance and so on and so forth, which was very effective until we started to expand our geographic footprint. And so you know, as we started to go further into Europe, further into parts of the Middle East and North Africa, and then out into Asia, it was impossible to have someone who spoke every possible language. And so then, of course, the question was, well, can we use technology? And the challenge is technology has even now not come as far as we'd like it to from the perspective of translation. So to give you a specific example, even dialects, right? So if you have a technology that is able to translate easily standard Arabic, the moment you put someone else in that room, you know, you lose the efficacy of that technology. And so my thinking around it is you have to be upfront about that, in terms of, you know, there is a power dynamic caused by the fact that we're using a certain language. It, you know, creates an issue for, you know, the folks who are coming in and it's their third language or whatever it is. And so what we chose to do were two things. One, we have created some programming that takes place in English, Arabic, and French, but we also, based on demand, but we've also had lots of conversations with the folks coming into the programming to say, you know, what are the benefits or deficits of the fact that this programming is happening in English? And what we hear over and over again is, because it's a dialogue process and not a language learning process, a lot of people who are not native speakers of English find it to be a very nurturing environment for them to actually advance their skills with language, because they're having the opportunity to practice in kind of a much more natural setting. So that's what we get told over and over again, but we are very cognizant that it remains a deficit.
From a facilitator point of view, one of the tricks that I use is that, for example, in the group, in the first session or first like session or two, we try to understand like which languages do we speak as a group. And then if we have like almost all of the time, but yeah, sometimes there might be some participants who do not speak, only one participant speaks one language. But for example, if we have two people like speaking Italian, they can help each other with different words. And this way they feel that they're heard, they can help in some translation. So we don't want to shift it from the original language that we have. So if the program is in English, we want them to practice English as well, because it is helping them, as you said, it's enriching their language skills.
Mm.
But asking them to help each other with different phrases and words creates like more trust within the whole group.
That makes sense. All right, we're going to take another question that was sent in beforehand. And this is about transfer, which I think is quite interesting. So how do I transfer digital trusts, if you started there, into the analog space, which may hold some surprises when my usual senses start working again, or maybe not anymore. So if you've started online, how do you transfer that trust to be offline?
Want to go first or should I?
You should go first.
Okay. So it's not easy to like, it is as difficult as shifting from analog to online, because then you're losing some senses. But now you've been trained to work without your senses, and you're like shocked with all of the senses together to work with it. I think what would work well is just like you started by breaking the ice online and creating a circle of trust, you can start doing it offline again. So giving some different aspects of breaking the ice, different activities to get on board again. Maybe also build on the experiences that you had. I'm building on like if we have a group and then we're moving them, the same group to meeting personally. So you start again, you've worked with them, you've built a lot of trust online, and now you're taking it again, but you need to start showing them how to build trust with their senses, because they know a lot of things about each other, and now they're super suspicious and trying to verify it. And that's the attempt of verifying the information that I've learned about you online is also not that easy. So trying to comfort them and give them the space with the different activities would be a start. But also then they'll start developing again the circle of trust based on the touch, on the body language itself. So I wouldn't claim that they have like the perfect answer for it, but this is how I would do it. I will give them the opportunity to start again.
I would even I would add to that I would start talking about that transition earlier. So, you know, as soon as you know that something's going to shift and you're going to be able to bring these people together in person, I think I would choose to think about ways in which you can maybe do some work still in that online setting, moving them to the notion of being in person. And that will come in the shape of what Rowan referred to in terms of certain activities, certain types of engagement with one another that would allow them to transition.
Yeah. This is
go
ahead.
One more point that I want to add, that some of our partner institutions use the virtual exchange itself as a preparation for the students before they go on actual mobility. So, and it has proved to be beneficial for them in working. So they're introduced to different culture. They're introduced on how to act with different people, that also like avoiding the cultural shock, avoiding the xenophobia of not accepting the others because we don't know them, and then they travel and they have really good experience. So I don't think the shift is really dramatic as we might expect it after staying like 2 years online and now just meeting people again.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to Rowan. That's what I was going to say as well, is that speaks to also an expectation of online trust building that I think some people think, oh, it's kind of a niche and you're either doing a program fully online or fully offline. But just to make aware of all of the possibilities in the middle, whether an online program is used in preparation or after a meeting happens in person, or specifically in the mediation space, we found that mediations currently, especially over the last year, but the shift is happening towards these hybrid processes where some things are taking place online, others are taking place offline. And so that bridge and that transfer is an important element. And I liked what you said, Waidehi, about just again, that point of making it explicit by, bringing those expectations out that this is going to happen. Okay. That's all the time I think we have for questions today, but there are several more that we didn't get to. So I would just sort of invite everyone who has questions that are unanswered, or those who are still listening and want to know more. I think this is maybe a good point of invitation to just follow these different organizations and these people, Waidehi and Rowan, the Sharing Perspectives Foundation and Solia, who are building trust online. And Waidehi, I know you have trainings. Rowan, I know you're putting out resources. So a lot of the answers to these questions, or at least the explorations of these questions, are ongoing. So I wonder if I could get you both to put in the links to where people could find more into the chat. And that can be a good way to continue the conversation. One link that I'm going to be putting in is that I had mentioned a few times, this work with the Mediation Support Unit. We have put out a course in collaboration with them on online mediation, and it includes a section in there, Building Trust Online. So I'm just going to also put that in. Okay, and I have one last plug, and then I'd love to give you an opportunity to say goodbye as well. If these are questions that you are thinking about, building trust online and how you've adapted over the pandemic to do that, we have the Build Peace Conference coming up this year. It's annual, and it's a conference that's focused on the intersection of technology and peace building and arts. And we're currently accepting applications to contribute to this conference in the form of short talks and workshops. So if this is something that you feel like you have things to say about, please submit your application to contribute to the Build Peace Conference. I can put the link there in the chat as well. Rowan, Waidehi, any final words that you want to say?
No, just to say, I think people should not shy away from trying to create opportunities for people to continue to build trust online.
I agree. And I would like to thank everybody for being here today, and to thank both of you, Tuli and Waidehi, for a great discussion.
Yeah. Thank you all
both.
so much.
Bye.